back to the Behavioral Gabaret. I'm Carrie Woodward, board certified behavior analyst and an early intervention specialist.
And I'm Javen Encarnacion, an educator, behavior analyst, and consultant.
Okay, in our final episode, we're closing out Science and Human Behavior with chapter 29, The Problem of Control. Skinner ends the book by asking the scariest question possible. If all behavior is controlled, who controls the controllers?
Right. So he tears down the fantasy of freedom and argues that pretending we're not controlled just leaves power in the worst hands.
We'll talk about denial, refusal, democracy as distributed control, and whether science itself can act as a safeguard against one person retaining absolute power.
So this is a really heavy chapter because this is where Skinner comes off as his most prophetic. So he's not just analyzing behavior anymore. He's warning us about the behavioral future. So Carrie,
Yes.
the I think for some context for everyone who's watching or listening along, the whole thesis behind Skinner's book is that science had made progress. It had done these incredible things, but it had also contributed to some ways that have caused real harm. So this is on the heels of two world wars. He's in the midst of a Cold War, and he's saying that we haven't actually applied a true natural science to study why people do what they do. And so he's through these chapters, he's taken the readers through different ways that we can look at behavior and analyze it and talk about it rationally and objectively and also compassionately.
Yeah.
And he has now arrived to the last chapter where he's talking about all of behavior is being controlled in some way. And he says the real danger isn't that behavior will be controlled. It's already being controlled. It's under control of the environment. It's under control of contingencies that are being manipulated by the government, by cultures, by relationships, between two people. And it's just haphazardly, so by whoever holds power on a global or even statewide country sense. If that's true, is the ethical plan really to avoid control or to control better? And who do you think is in practice should we trust with that responsibility?
Okay, so obviously you can't avoid control.
Hmm.
He's just spent an entire book talking about how our behavior is under the control of the environment in one level or another, or multiple levels all at the same time, multiple forms of control, all being exerted simultaneously. And so there isn't a path to avoid control. And so the path really becomes how to control better. How can we avoid aversive control or coercive control? And the problem is that in laying out all of this, he's really setting the stage for like understanding how control works, but not everybody has this knowledge. And so those of us with this knowledge become seen as manipulators. We are the ones that understand how control works. And so when we are designing control to happen in better ways, we're looked at as manipulating what the natural course of events would be. But I'm arguing is that it's under control anyway. And sometimes the negative sources of control that make life uncomfortable or sad or whatever. All of these other negative byproducts of aversive types of control. And so who should we trust with that responsibility? Obviously, behavior analysts. I mean, that behavior analysts don't exist in more levels of the government, in public works, in city planning. I am face to face with things on a daily basis that I think, boy, if there was a behavior analyst in this, it sure would be a lot better. And we talk about every chapter that we've talked about outlines in some way some system, education, religion, economics, systems that control behavior. And most of these systems are lacking a behavioral scientist's input, understanding, and direction on how we can be doing it in a more responsible way.
Hmm. I think that's really interesting. I think I would agree with you to an extent, with like caveats of no, like with checks and balances on every person, which I think you would agree to,
Sure.
because the as we've seen, even behavior analysts aren't immune to the contingency. So the reason that behavior analysis and the field of applied behavior analysis specifically has developed the way that it has is that the field was responding and reacting to certain contingencies, and now
That's
that's
true.
one of the reasons that we haven't gotten and branched out. And so you'll see that whenever we can objectively and functionally implement strategies to make the world better, and have a degree of control over the variables that have an impact, and tying that that behavior analyst success to the outcomes of that. I think that would be really incredible, so because that's I think that's kind of what's missing right now, is that there's no oftentimes in many aspects of society, the people who are empowered aren't accountable for their actions. And so you'll see, like in our government, people are able to do things that are incredibly unethical,
Uh-huh.
and wielding powers and levels of power that as a profession would be considered unethical.
Right.
We can never do that. And um yeah, so I don't know where I'm going with that. I do think that their checks and balances are really important, and that people also have all of us have a responsibility to participate in
Mm.
in the ways that we can. But even then, especially people who have more opportunity or more um, education, even then, because
Right.
we all have different instructional histories and at a disadvantage. Feel like I'm rambling, so I think.
No, no, but you said something that was really interesting in the beginning of that. You said designing designing systems for the better. And I
Mhm.
feel like with the problem is that we have people who don't agree on what better means. And so unless you had a consensus on what that looked like, it would be hard. Because I know that as a behavior analyst, I know what my opinion is on what things could be better. Like even just like, okay, so we just got off of, well, we still are sort of in at a government shutdown, the longest one in the history of the US. And even something simple like contingency manipulation to say like, if you're a senator or a congressperson and there's a government shutdown because you have failed to come to an agreement, you don't get paid.
Yeah.
Would be so easy. It would be so easy to manipulate behavior to avoid ending up in this situation again in the future. And yet, it's not that they don't probably know that that could help. It's that they're the ones that would have to vote for that to happen. And so, those in power, it's not always equitable in terms of the people who are in power and making decisions that don't benefit everybody, but that maybe benefit themselves.
And I think that is where we kind of run into issues, is that and that's kind of how the government was designed too. And so and it comes back to what Skinner's talking about a lot, where he argues that denying control or preaching freedom doesn't solve the problem, it just hides who's doing the controlling. So in the issue instance with the government shutdown, it is our elected representatives, who have taken this, um who are wielding power in ways that are harming
Uh-huh.
American citizens
Yeah.
and their electorate. And so it's trying to deny that the control isn't at play, and that they're not using all of us as pawns, is it doesn't solve the problem. Do you think that modern society is more free or simply more diversified in who gets to control us?
Yeah, I don't think it's more free. No, in fact, I feel like in ways it's less diversified. That there's more of a consolidation of power of who gets to do the controlling, and when you weaken the voice of the electorate in ways that disenfranchises certain voters or gerrymandering to make sure that certain voices aren't allowed equal say in votes, then you do have like a less diversified um, unit of control. And I even as we've gotten bigger and more modern, and this the understanding of like if we think about this book coming out in 57, right? 53, 57, um, that we've had this knowledge for this many years, and yet there's still this lack of sort of intentional design that it is sort of like like the control that's happening is done in sort of an unknowing way to benefit those in power. So yeah, I don't necessarily think that it's like we're on a better path. But he does end by saying that science might help design cultures that maximize survival and long-term well-being, which is, I think, what we all want, right? But sometimes that means we might need to abandon some cherished ideas like free will or the moral law. Boy, the idea of free will will be they're going to be gripping that out of their dead cold hands. Okay, so could humanity ever accept a future where behavior is engineered for the greater good? Like we've been saying, like this beautiful society? And if it could, what would keep it from sliding into a new kind of soft power grab?
Uh, I I think it's too idealistic
Yeah, me
um,
too.
to say, because at the end of the day, everyone also has different instructional histories. I know that in Walden too, he describes the potential to develop societies and even govern in a way that makes it really challenging for people to acquire power and maintain power.
Yeah.
Uh, and so there's always like I think I forgot, it's been a long time since I read it, but ideas about like term limits and everyone plays a role in every part of the government to some capacity and to society in general. So that way uh, the need for power diminishes, I
Mm,
guess.
yeah.
Because a lot of this comes down to human, I don't want to say human nature, but I think to evolutionary responses, maybe even, that like to maintain resources,
Yes.
to control, like the idea of control, to have really the most freedom. If
Yeah.
you think about it, so the people who are in control, they want the freedom to live the life as they want. And maybe in some ways they see other people having the same freedom as restrictive for them. Who knows?
Mm.
Um,
Well, and I think that was the goal of the Constitution, right? Was like this way to check power, to make sure that it didn't consolidate, but to be sure that it wasn't yielded
mhm.
for purposes that were against the citizens. And yet, what we've seen is that that document is fallible. Like,
And I see, and I'm like, actually, neither of us would have the freedoms that document purports to grant to people when it was written. And
yeah,
there, I think in the bigger, because we've been talking about America, but also in other countries too. So hypothetically, if we were to take the whole world and have control over it, and
mm,
what could we do? You start getting into some weird ideas. So think about like the book The Giver, where they
yeah. It's
kind of
one of my
have this,
favorite books of all time.
it's like this, it's very idealistic and it's beautiful, and they're like euthanizing people. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the there's only so far I feel like you can go talking about it and how perfect it would be until you have to start addressing some really hard things like the overpopulation
Yeah.
of people in America and in the world. So
And
I think
making
that
those generalizations of things that would be good and beneficial for the society at large sometimes robs the individual at the individual level. Like when I think about The Giver, there were so many things that were done for the benefit of the society at whole, and what they took away from everybody was the memories of color of how vibrant life could be.
mhm,
And so I guess that's sort of the end lesson to sit with is like could it ever be on a global scale? I don't know. What sacrifices, what concessions would we have to make at the level of the individual in order to have something that was so beautifully and elegantly designed to serve the whole group as opposed to the individual?
yeah, I think that's probably a really good project someone could do, is Walden 2 versus like The Giver.
Ooh, maybe our
Because
next podcast series when we finally
yeah.
are done reading for schoolwork.
So, looking at the similarities and differences, and
Hmm.
maybe some things that Walden 2 may have missed.
I like that idea. Next hobbies.
Yeah. Let's we'll add that to
Okay.
our December podcast list.
I love it. All right. Well, this has been so fun. We hope that we've given you just a little bit of insight into Skinner's seminal work on how the science of human behavior can explain so many aspects of our day to day life.
It's the